For members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the restoration of the gospel is the foundation of our faith. But how does that all-important event impact our lives from day to day? Brigham Young University Professor of Family Sciences, Terrance D. Olson, addresses that topic in his presentation, What the Restoration Means to Families, a gospel view of everyday life.
Welcome to Education Week, brothers and sisters. Our goal is to end a series that shows how the gospel applies to everyday life. And the title of this series is Family Wholeness, the Reality of Our Ideals. And among other things, we're going to be addressing concepts that suggest why the gospel is the most realistic way to approach life. This title for today specifically is What the Restoration Means to Families. I call it a gospel view of everyday life. And that may seem pretty mundane, but what we're trying to do with the gospel view of everyday life is show that our lives ought to be different because we have the gospel, and that our neighbors ought to be able to see that difference by the way we treat them, by the way we are with our families, and in every other aspect of living. Doesn't mean we have to be perfect. It simply means that we allow the gospel to inform the way we are with one another. And at the very least, we want in our family relationships and in the way we treat one another to, quote, not do damage. Our topic today addresses directly the idea that because we have the restored gospel, our life is forever changed, or it ought to be. A gospel view of everyday life means we undertake each day with a sensibility regarding why the mission of the Savior is necessary and why being on the earth is a blessing. This view of life should mean that we conduct ourselves and our families with a spirit and a practice not necessarily available to the world at large, but it is available to anybody of faith, be they in Columbia, Missouri, or Mesa, Arizona, or wherever your home is. So we're going to try and take gospel truths and claim that it goes across all geography, that it goes across all ethnic groups, that it goes across all economic contexts. The gospel, frankly, is the most fundamental defining feature of our being on the earth and of our purpose for being on the earth. I'm indebted in the analysis and the possibilities that I'm going to be talking about today to Terry Warner, who has done so much to invite so many to take the restoration seriously. He's done extensive work to legitimize the idea of moral agency, and he's done that in a world which so often denies agency as even a possibility. My prayer this day, and frankly all week long, is that we relearn principles which make even more sense to us a week from Wednesday or during any time of need. I always remember the person that came to me once after a talk where we had talked about some simple principles of the gospel, and this person said to me that the principles sounded so good when we were in a beige chapel with no crying children and no interruptions, but that as soon as we got home, everything seemed to fall apart, and the world of the chapel and the principles taught there seemed so distant from the everyday life world. My goal is always to try and show how that dichotomy or that difference need not be, and that it requires something about the way we are to see the possibility that I want to talk about. I particularly am aware that there are those among us who have cause to mourn. I pray a gospel view of everyday life will sustain them through events which the world would consider impossible to bear. And while that's an extreme setting to begin with, my belief is that if the gospel applies to the way we live life in extreme circumstances, it has to be all the more simple to apply to us in everyday life and everyday circumstances. Now here's an introductory vignette. What I hope is that the meaning of what I'm about to give you in this little story is clearer and crisper and deeper at the end of this hour than it may seem to be at the beginning. A good friend of mine, Cheryl, her real name, was searching for a parking place in one of those grocery store parking lots where there are never enough spaces, you know, where the lot is always full. Her goal wasn't to get a place close to the front of the store. It was just to find an empty space anywhere in the lot. Finally, after 10 minutes of searching, she's heading south along a lane of cars when she saw one aisle over an empty parking space. But she was on this row and had 2/3 of the way to go down it before she could get around into the aisle with the empty space. And then, of course, she had to go 2/3 of the way back. As she turned in the long end of the aisle with the parking space, you guessed it, a car came in the other end, the short end. This car, if it was looking for a parking place, had only half the distance to cover that my friend Cheryl did. Cheryl was pretty motivated. Remember, she'd been searching for 10 minutes, which seemed like an eternity to her. And this new car had just arrived on the scene, hadn't paid any kind of a price. What am I going to do? This newcomer motivated Cheryl. She pressed on the accelerator, and she got down that road quickly, but not quickly enough. The newcomer, this Johnny or Janie come lately, she hadn't seen which yet, managed to slide into the space just before Cheryl got there. Cheryl slammed on the brakes, was full of furious thoughts. How dare this person usurp what was rightfully hers? It was as if Cheryl had been waiting in line, biding her time, paying the price of vigilance for victory, when an illegitimate pretender to the parking place scooped it up without regret, without guilt, or without any other of the feelings that such people ought to suffer from if they had any sensitivity or conscience at all. Cheryl decided to let this lucky but insensitive stealer of spaces know exactly what she had so rudely done. So Cheryl got out of the car, slammed the door on her still idling automobile. Fortunately, didn't lock the keys in it, but slammed the door on her still idling automobile, which was still awkwardly angled in the middle of the lane, you know, and turned to confront her thoughtless tormentor. But before she could turn around, she heard this voice. "Cheryl, how are you? I haven't seen you forever." The voice from Cheryl's enemy was from her favorite aunt. Immediately, Cheryl gave her a big hug and said, "Oh, I know, I haven't seen you. I feel terrible. I haven't come over lately." Now, how is an event such as this possible? How is it possible to be furious in one moment and hugging in the next? What is it about humans which makes such a transformation possible? Now, if we can answer this question, we can answer an important question about how the gospel can and ought to make a difference in the way we conduct ourselves in everyday life. And if the gospel can help us in simple circumstances such as parking lot frustrations, then it likely can address even more dramatic, intense, or even distressing circumstances. Let's begin then to talk about what the restoration means to families by offering a gospel view of everyday life, which must include a gospel view of this woman, my friend Cheryl, in the parking lot. Perhaps the value of the restoration in our daily lives is most dramatically illustrated in matters of life and death, as I have mentioned. The coming forth of the restoration did itself involve life and death. From D&C 135, we are reminded this, quote, "When Joseph went to Carthage to deliver himself up to the pretended requirements of the law, 2 or 3 days previous to his assassination, he said, 'I am going like a lamb to the slaughter. I am calm as a summer's morning. I have a conscience void of offense towards God and towards all men. I shall die innocent, and it shall yet be said of me, he was murdered in cold blood.'" Now that's verse 4 of D&C 135, written by John Taylor. I might add that Joseph's words echo those of Paul in an interesting circumstance in Acts 24:16, where Paul said, "I have a conscience void of offense towards God and towards all men." It is significant to me that a feature of Joseph's knowing journey to his last imprisonment was his own declaration that he had a conscience void of offense towards God and towards all men. To be void of offense is to not be resentful of, angry with, or hostilely blaming of someone else. In other words, Joseph is not blaming God for his situation. He is not shaking his fist at the heavens, would be another way to say this. And it is significant that Joseph had nothing against God regarding his circumstances, his sorrows, or even the events that are about to transpire, okay? It is as if he remembered that we all shouted for joy to be able to come to earth, and that things work together for the good of those who love the Lord. Perhaps taking the gospel seriously in everyday life suggests to us a way of being, even when those we love or who should love us seem to have abandoned us or moved against us. This way of being doesn't mean that we have no feelings or emotions about injustice or murder or false witness or any of the other sins against which Joseph had been the victim. There can be a host of wrongs against us and against our neighbors in the face of what we're proposing. But even in the face of that, Joseph is saying, I have a conscience void of offense. What this does mean, though, is that the quality of emotions that we experience is different when we are faithful and humble as compared to when we live without faith and with the kind of arrogance that makes us independent of God. Hiram Smith, Joseph's companion in this whole adventure, died with his brother Joseph in that Carthage jail in Illinois. Hiram read a passage of Scripture from Ether 12 just before they left for imprisonment. It's a significant thought which relates also to not being offended by what befalls us during our missions on the earth. In this Ether 12 passage, Moroni is speaking, and it's just acknowledged the Lord's mission of charity and of love. Then Moroni prays, and this is his prayer in Ether 12. And it came to pass that I prayed unto the Lord that he would give unto the Gentiles grace that they might have charity. And it came to pass that the Lord said unto me, if they have not charity, it mattereth not unto thee. Thou hast been faithful, wherefore thy garments shall be made clean. And because thou hast seen thy weakness, thou shalt be made strong, even unto the sitting down in the place which I have prepared in the mansions of my Father. We'll come back to these. These words will echo through the talk, frankly. And now I bid farewell unto the Gentiles. This is after the prayer. And now I bid farewell unto the Gentiles, yea, and also unto my brethren whom I love, until we shall meet before the judgment seat of Christ, where all men shall know that my garments are not spotted with your blood. So what Moroni is saying, Hiram has found meaningful in a moment of Hiram departing. Moroni is saying farewell, and Hiram is quoting this verse perhaps in anticipation of his own and Joseph's farewell. That's Ether 12, 36 to 38, by the way, and it's as quoted by John Taylor in D&C 135.5. That's my basic source. Hiram then seems to sense he is also bidding farewell to the brethren he loves, perhaps confident about how he will fare at the judgment seat of Christ. So at the least, while we may always pray for those who raise their hands against us to be smitten with charity, wouldn't it be nice if they always were? The Lord taught Moroni something Hiram learned from. Moroni was reminded that the first issue is not whether the Gentiles have charity. The Lord's testimony to Moroni, which Hiram found comforting, was, thou hast been faithful. Thou hast seen thy weakness. Such simple starting points as faith and admitting weakness are more important to the Lord than whether our enemies have charity. In a gospel view of everyday life, who we are is the first concern, and I hope that's making sense. Who others are, who they are, will only be understood by us according to who we are. Here's an incident that reveals this. A freshman who came to the university reported that nobody on campus was friendly, that she felt like walking from one side of campus to the other was an adventure in loneliness. I asked her, would you be willing to say hello to the next person that passes you going the other way? Why? They're not saying hello to me. Well, as Tevye once said, if all we do is live life with an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, then pretty soon the whole world will be blind and toothless. Do you remember that? So if we don't say hello to people except that they say hello to us first, we can establish a new quality of reverence walking across campus that people wouldn't have ever supposed, because nobody will say anything. So who are we? If we are greeters, If we say hello, the response may be, oh, hello, or it may be, But what is that to us? If we are going to pray that other people say hello to us, the Lord might very well say to us, it mattereth not whether they say hello to you. It mattereth not whether they have charity. Thou hast been faithful. Or in this little everyday experience, thou hast said hello. The question, of course, is, are you saying hello with your heart? Or to see if somebody will say hello? That might very well make a difference as well. Well, again, who other people are will only be understood by us according to who we are. If we are looking for the right to feel lonely because nobody will say hello, we're revealing more who we are than who they may be. Until we get ourselves straight, we will never figure out other people very well anyway. All right. The thoughts of Joseph and Hyrum, then, on the eve of their martyrdom, express some simple and stunning thoughts regarding how we are to be while on this earth. For if they believe these thoughts that we've rehearsed, even in the face of death, surely we can take them seriously as we approach the simple tasks of daily living. The fruits of Joseph's work, by the way, with the support of Hyrum and many others, prompted John Taylor to explain in D&C 135.6, the Book of Mormon and this Book of Doctrine and Covenants of the Church cost the best blood of the 19th century to bring them forth for the salvation of a ruined world. See, our legacy is not just some abstract ideas that somebody wrote. Our legacy is that people gave their lives for the truth that we could and should be the beneficiaries of. Well, what's the meaning of all this? If the best blood of the 19th century is the cost of what we today hold so dear, then let's use those thoughts which inspired Joseph and Hyrum to answer the question of what the restoration means to families. It ought to apply. How do the thoughts they read and expressed relate to a gospel view of everyday life? First of all, what is the impact on our families when we have a conscience void of offense toward God and towards all men? Second, how is it that when others do not have charity, that we don't need to feel defeated or in despair? That need not be the consequence of others' mistreatment of us. In our culture, the phrase, "you have offended me," is common. It describes the source of feelings of someone who feels wronged, betrayed, mistreated, and whose life has been made hard, if not miserable, by the conduct of others. The feelings of the offended are such that they would say they can't help how they feel, and that their feelings are someone else's fault. In families, being offended is illustrated by being hurt, by being denied attention, by being given too little of the family resources. A brother thinks another brother is dad's favorite. A daughter resents her sister borrowing her clothes without permission. A husband thinks he's unappreciated. A wife feels as if she were the family's pack animal. All such feelings are signs of having been offended by the actions and attitudes of others. Now, the sources of our offended feelings can be petty. They especially seem petty after certain events are over. Things that seem very important to us at the time look pretty ridiculous after some contentious exchange has finished. But our feelings at the time are real, and we can't deny that we have them. Well, I'm claiming this. I'm claiming that our culture accepts the idea that it is possible and even typical for other people to offend us, and therefore to produce feelings, attitudes, and actions that we may not like, and we may not necessarily be proud of these feelings, okay? But we can't help having them. That's the cultural view. In that cultural view, we believe such feelings have been produced by others. Now think about this for a minute. If this view is legitimate, then in a fundamental sense, we're saying that such feelings are not our fault. Under this view, we can live life as if we were helpless in the face of such feelings. An implication of this cultural belief is that emotions in the context that I've been describing now, we simply are not responsible for. Think of the last time you were hostile or resentful of somebody. I bet you anything you thought your feelings were their fault. My suspicion is if you were asked to explain yourself, why are you so resentful of Charlotte? that you would have said, well, you haven't seen the way she treats me, have you? And in the very way you respond to somebody's challenge of your feelings, you would claim your emotions aren't generated by anything you're doing, but are simply a consequence of what somebody else is doing. And you can't help it. We might even say to people, how would you feel if? And maybe we get people to agree with us. But I'm going to challenge this view, as you might suspect. In any event, under this view, we can live life as if we were helpless in the face of such feelings. And an implication of this cultural belief is we're just not responsible for them. Another way of saying this, I guess, is to say we are victims emotionally. We're victims of how other people treat us. Such is my claim about what our culture at large believes. Okay? Now, if you accept this cultural view of certain feelings and emotions, if we are victims of hostilities and injustices and resentments and so on, then how could Joseph Smith testify that he was void of offense? Think about that. That offensive things had been done to him and to the saints from the beginning is well documented. The imprisonment to which he was submitting was unjust. So Joseph couldn't have meant that he was not subject to offensive, unjust acts. It is more likely that he's describing the spirit of his response to virtually all the wicked acts mounted against him. To be void of offense can refer to not being offended at the offensive conduct of those who considered Joseph an enemy. To be void of offense invokes the idea that we have the ability not to take offense at offensive behavior. That is, we need not adopt the contentious, hateful spirit of those who are contentious and hateful. If we do become such, we become like those who are offensive. And then we are no longer void of offense ourselves. When our attitudes are resentful and offensive, we become like the people who have been offensive toward us. Jesus took this idea all the way to the bone in the sense that he told truths that he said would, quote, offend people. Now, how can the truth offend people? Well, in a moment, we'll talk about that. But for the moment, let me just give you this. This is the Passover and the instituting of the sacrament. I'm going to go to Matthew 26, and I'll start at verse 29. He's talking to the apostles. I say unto you, I will not drink henceforth of this fruit of the vine, thank you, until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. So he's testifying to them at the sacrament, remember? And when they had sung a hymn, they went out into the Mount of Olives. Then saith Jesus unto them, all ye shall be offended because of me this night. For it is written, I will smite the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock shall be scattered abroad. How can it be that the believers will be offended? What does that mean? Well, all of us have confronted truths that we did not want to confront. All of us have been convicted by our conscience at times when the truth has been testified to us and we have not been willing to respond truthfully to the truth. I'm thinking of Laman and Lemuel for a moment as an example of this, to flesh out this idea of what it means to be offended. Remember that Laman and Lemuel's initial response to Lehi's dream of the tree and the rod of iron and the river was disinterest at best and ridicule at worst, okay? But there came a time when Nephi was rehearsing all this to them. And for whatever reason, his rehearsal must have touched their hearts. I'm in 1 Nephi 15. In the New Scriptures, that's page 32 in the Book of Mormon. I want to read you something from what Nephi did with his brothers. And I, Nephi, did rehearse unto them the words of Isaiah, who spake concerning the restoration of the Jews, or the house of Israel. And after they were restored, they should no more be confounded, neither should they be scattered. And it came to pass that I did speak many words unto my brethren, that they were pacified and did humble themselves before the Lord. Where in the Scriptures did you find that Laman and Lemuel were pacified, humbled before the Lord? Verse 21, and it came to pass that they did speak unto me again, saying, what meaneth this thing which our father saw in a dream? What meaneth the tree which he saw? When you're humble and pacified, you do seek You do ask questions. You do want to know more, instead of brushing it off, ignoring it, or finding it offensive. So Nephi responded to their humbleness and their being pacified, and told them more and more and more, even rehearsing the future to them in terms of gospel principles unto the end of the earth. But evidently something happened between 1 Nephi 15:21, where they were humble and pacified, and the end of the story Nephi was telling. Because in 1 Nephi 16, verse 1, Nephi says, "And now it came to pass that after I, Nephi, had made an end of speaking to my brethren, behold, they said unto me, Thou hast declared unto us hard things, more than we are able to bear. And it came to pass that I said unto them that I know I had spoken hard things against the wicked according to the truth, and the righteous have I justified, and testified that they, the righteous, should be lifted up at the last day. Wherefore the guilty taketh the truth to be hard, for it cutteth into the very center." Now, pause. Do you begin to see the meaning of Joseph saying, "I have a conscience void of offense toward God and towards all men"? Joseph, in going to Carthage, did not take the truth to be hard. My claim is that if Joseph could see the circumstances in that way, in his life and death prophetic option that he knew, surely in our everyday life we can see things without being offended, with being void of offense. I'm going to claim this. Even in more mundane contexts where we are offended, such as in parking lots, we usually become, in spirit and attitude, like the people we are accusing. We become like the people we're accusing of causing our feelings. The person offended at his clothes being borrowed without permission is doing more than saying, "Well, it's not right that you would use my property this way." The offended person is emotionally caught up in the other person's wrongdoing and uses the injustice to justify hate, resentment, impatience, frustration, maybe a little moral superiority, and a host of other possible accusatory feelings. It is this kind of retaliatory emotional response which Joseph testified he was free of. Hence, he was calm as a summer's morning, because he was not in spirit or attitude regarding his tormentors as they regarded him. This did not mean Joseph was naive to injustice or wickedness or the likelihood that he was in mortal danger. He knew all that. On the contrary, he understood better than the jailers did what the stakes were. The issue was the work of the Lord, the reality of the contest between good and evil. The issue was between the Lord's plan and Satan's resistance to that plan. Joseph was not offended because he did not take offense. As Terry Warner has helped point out, the difference between being offended and taking offense is the difference between being a victim and being a moral agent. You cannot be both simultaneously. Elder Lynn G. Robbins of the 70 addressed this issue in this year's April conference. In referring to the family as Satan's primary target, Elder Robbins notes how Satan seeks to damage and destroy families within the walls of their own homes by stirring up anger between family members. Now, anger is a classic and extreme emotion. It's one that the doctrine of the world says is a feeling we can't help. It's one that the Scriptures testify against and even call it sin. So Elder Robbins is addressing this. The Scriptures have commanded that contention and anger be done away with. You can go to Scriptures such as Helaman 14:30 or 3 Nephi 11:29 and 30 to identify that. In referring to Satan's tactics, Elder Robbins said this, quote, "A cunning part of his strategy is to dissociate anger from agency, making us believe that we are victims of an emotion that we cannot control. We hear, still quoting now, 'I lost my temper.' Losing one's temper is an interesting choice of words that has become a widely used idiom. To lose something implies not meaning to, or accidental, or involuntary, or not responsible." Elder Robbins goes on to know, that's the end of the quote, Elder Robbins goes on to note that emotions such as anger are matters of agency, not matters of helplessness. His thoughts are not only consistent with Scripture, but also with the idea that we may not be emotional victims of others' offensive conduct, even though our culture suggests such a thing. So now we've got a contrast. We've got a culture saying, I'm offended, you have offended me. And we've got the gospel saying, maybe I have taken offense. The restoration may very well give us a different view of the phrase, you have offended me. Perhaps with the gospel in our everyday life, we would transform the phrase from, you have offended me, to I have taken offense. This moves the concept from one of being a helpless emotional victim of maybe the lack of charity of others to a focus on how we as agents can respond to those who mistreat us. Another clue to this possibility is in the counsel of the Lord to Moroni, which Hiram quoted. These two things relate. If they have not charity, it mattereth not unto thee. Why? Thou hast been faithful, wherefore thy garments shall be made clean. And because thou hast seen thy weakness, thou shalt be made strong, even to the sitting down in the place which I have prepared in the mansions of my Father. That's either 12 and 37 again. This response implies that the gospel's starting point to dealing with injustice or lack of appreciation or favoritism of all kinds or any other offensive conduct lies not in the offender, but in those who would be offended. Examine for a moment the meaning of being offended. See if it is incompatible with the idea of taking offense. When I'm offended, I'm saying that you've caused feelings in me which I can't help. I begin to experience life as your victim. My evidence is pretty simple. My case against you seems logical and strong. Think of Laman and Lemuel for a moment. They didn't have a problem at the end of Nephi's discourse. Their problem was Nephi, who declared unto us hard things. As if the things themselves, as if the truths Nephi told were what was hard in the situation. But it may very well be that it was Laman and Lemuel who were hard. My evidence against you, if I am hard, is very simple. I rehearse in my soul or verbally declare what it is you have done unto me. And as long as I can remember and nurture and almost blow on a fire that I'm trying to start, I'm perfectly justified in experiencing certain feelings against you. Now, I'm claiming this is a pervasive worldview in our culture. I suspect many family arguments, grudges, feelings of alienation are based on taking this view seriously. People retaliate emotionally or physically for those wrongs against them which they experience as more than they can bear. What's one of the phrases? Well, we all have our breaking points. Well, people who are hard have a greater tendency to break than people who are not hard. Well, teenagers can feel justified in feelings of embarrassment against their parents, or in feelings of frustration against limits and expectations placed on them. Parents feel they can't help be resentful of the lack of gratitude in their children, or for the refusal of children to attend to their schoolwork or their chores or their piano practice or their church assignments. Each person who is offended by the conduct of others simultaneously experiences emotions which seem so logical and inescapable. We have come to call such feelings human nature. Joseph Smith calls those feelings, the Savior calls those feelings, taking offense. In a certain sense, this view of the world does describe much of how some people experience life. I mean, can't we all recall experiences where we have been hard, when we've been resentful, hostile, angry, and we simultaneously have felt justified precisely because of how we've been treated? Such feelings are especially disheartening when they involve people we care about. So some of our own experience can sustain the idea that offended feelings are human nature. Let me give you an example. When I first came to BYU, I ended up in charge of the marriage class. And the marriage class was very popular, as you can imagine. Maybe confirming the stereotype that BYU really isn't. But the idea is that we wanted to have some uniformity in that class. And so we decided that everybody ought to use the same textbook. And we got everybody to agree that they would require that textbook, and they could have additional readings if they wanted. They could do some free things. But they agreed to have that textbook. Well, the bookstore was nervous about ordering 2,000 copies of a text, which is the number of students we taught per semester in those days. Some of you were in those classes, I'm sure. And the bookstore person explained to me when I placed the order, now, Brother Olson, you know that all it takes is one professor not to require the book. And we've got 200 copies of a book sitting there that we can't sell, and we lose money. I said, oh, don't worry, everybody's committed to requiring that book. We just made a department decision on it. And our enrollment's already at 1,900. By the time, it'll be fine. Okay, Brother Olson. Okay. I didn't think about it, didn't worry about it. 3 weeks into the semester, I get a phone call from the bookstore. Brother Olson, we have 180 books of the marriage book over here. We're 3 weeks into the semester. We warned you, frankly, that if there are extra books, we can't afford to absorb those costs. So, and this was a fellow that evidently believed in agency because he gave me a choice. He said, yeah. He said, Brother Olson, would your department like to pay to ship those books back, or would your department just like to pay for the books? And I didn't want to do either one, you know. So I said, I'll work on this. Do you have any idea what the problem is? And they said, yes, it seems to us that Professor Oiseau is not requiring the book. Okay? I said, look, I'll check on it. And I hung up. Now, I just made a moral commitment. By the way, for those of you with an historical bent, don't try to find a Professor Oiseau. It's not in the book. You won't find it in history, right? The situation is real. The name is not. Well, I had just made a moral commitment to find out what the trouble was. But instead of doing the right thing, I took offense. I became hard in my feelings about the situation, especially feeling, you know, being on the faculty would be worth something if all the other faculty had integrity. And I began to feel a victim of somebody named Oiseau for not following through on the commitment. But intriguingly, interestingly, inescapably, and condemningly, I didn't do what I said. I didn't pick up the phone and say, Oiseau, Terry here. Yeah, listen, the bookstore just called and said that the 200 books sitting over there are because you're not requiring it. What goes on here? That would have been the simple, straightforward, void of offense thing to do. I did not do it. I wandered through that whole day until the next without honoring, without responding to the moral obligation I felt to solve that problem. I kept putting other things in the way, you know, to the point that the next day I got a phone call from Oiseau about 10 o'clock. You need to understand I had made a list of things to do for that next day. I'd say, finish writing the exam. Okay, grade these papers. Call Oiseau. You can tell I was offended by the very idea of having to call the man. Said things to myself like, he's so intimidating. Do you see my excuse? Do you see my rationalization? Do you see how I was making myself a victim? Do you see how when I took offense, it was all Oiseau's fault? He's the one that didn't require the books. I can't call him. He's so intimidating. Boy, I built my case so subtly, softly, so condemningly of me. Well, Oiseau called me. And the first part of my conversation with him was about as double-minded as it gets. You can tell even though you don't hear his side of the conversation. Here's my side of the conversation. Hello, yeah. Oh, hi, Oiseau, yeah, Well, no, I don't know. Well, you're going to have to check on that. No, there's nothing wrong. Well, no, there is something. I wasn't going to say anything to you, but... And then I told him. Said the bookstore called me and said their worst fears have been realized, that they've got 200 books sitting over there because you haven't required the text, and they want the department to pay for them. Maybe since you're the one that didn't require the books, how do you pay for them? I said none of this compassionately, as I hope you can tell. I said it all offensively. Now, some of you have anticipated that Oiseau is innocent, and that is the truth. But I want you to understand something. It gives evidence not that I had feelings because of a mistaken perception, but because my heart was wrong. Had I done the very thing that I believed, Oiseau, what's going on? I would have found out what I needed to find out and gone on from there, void of offense. But in my refusal to be the moral agent I knew I was by doing a simple thing to solve the problem, by refusing to do that, everybody, including Oiseau, and especially Oiseau, became my enemy. As soon as I found out he was innocent, and I can't tell you why I believed him except that he was void of offense and I was not. Terry, boy, I don't know what's going on, but not only have I required the book, but we're a third of the way through it. We're really making it the foundation of the course. Now, if I'm going to live offensively, what's the next thing? That bookstore. It's always somebody else's fault, you know. Well, I came to my senses before I solved the problem. Early in the afternoon, I sat up straight and said, look what I am doing. I was almost gleeful in a perverted sort of way that Oiseau was guilty, because my heart was probably hard against him before the incident ever began. I had always worried about his follow-through, and now I had my evidence and my justification. But it was all a lie. It was all a way of being offended and marshaling my evidence. When I came to my senses, which is another way of saying when I became void of offense, when I saw the truth, I went to Oiseau and I knocked on his door and I said, Oiseau, yeah, Terry, what about the books? I said, I don't know yet. I just came here to tell you that I enjoyed too much the fact that I thought you were guilty, and I apologize, and I'm going to be different, and I'm going to repent. And he was pretty startled and stunned and confused by the whole thing, because he'd been living his life void of offense toward me, while I'd been living my life full of offense toward him. Well, okay, Terry, if you say so, that's fine. And is there anything else we need to do? No, I just need to live up to my part of the bargain now. I'll let you know when I solve the book problem. Oh, well, okay, thanks, Terry. I've got to say to you that of all the changes of my life, this is one of the ones that was most permanent. For the next 20 years, Oiseau and I did not take offense at one another. That one little incident alone demonstrates to me the reality of Joseph's situation in an incredibly more extreme context than the one I've described for you, that it's possible to live void of offense in the way we treat one another. And by the way, the solution was embarrassing and simple. Across 2,000 students, guess how many people that took that marriage class were roommates? And guess how many of them were living on a shoestring? And guess how many of them shared a book? How dumb can a PhD be, you know? Across 2,000 students, it's amazing we didn't have more books than that sitting there. But once we uncovered it and explained it to the bookstore, they asked if we were using the book again, and they said, oh, well, okay, we'll just buy fewer books and we'll use more used ones and we'll go about. And it was all solved. Something that could have been solved in 20 minutes, I let fester for a day and a half. Well, I hope I'm giving a sense here that our own experience testifies that what I'm talking about, taking offense, is true. I mean, in an unfortunate sense, if I can live in an offended way, you can live in an offended way. And if I can live void of offense, anybody can live void of offense, okay? Surely we are all offended at one time or another, even if just in heavy traffic or just by our 2-year-old throwing our food dish on the floor. However, if we also accept the doctrine that we are moral agents, there is something inconsistent and unsettling about accepting the idea that we are agents regarding our attitudes and feelings towards others, except when we can't help having such attitudes and feelings. We have a built-in justification, you know? The proposal I ask you to consider is that since it was possible for Joseph to be void of offense in a life and death situation, it is possible for us to be void of offense, especially regarding lesser injustices. I call upon Moroni again for support. The counsel Joseph and Hiram could draw from Moroni's words in Ether 12 include giving up worrying about whether the Gentiles will ever have charity, so to speak. Rather, the more immediate concern must be, at the least, our personal faithfulness and our willingness to acknowledge our weaknesses. Those two acts, faith and meekness, are the acts of agents, not of victims, and are evidently completely possible no matter what our circumstances. We can be concerned about the Gentiles' lack of charity out of concern for them and their ultimate fate, don't get me wrong, but not as an excuse to resent or hate them. And the issue certainly is not to look at our tormentors through some self-righteous lenses where we are thankful we're not like them. If we were to be in the business of acknowledging our own weaknesses, we would be too busy being humble and faithful to partake of that kind of arrogance that accuses others. So here's a review of the possibility we're offering. When we are offended, we are really taking offense. When we are hurt by others, or when we feel justified in our arrogant treatment of our children, or when we're contentious against our mates for their real or imagined wrongdoings, we are behaving as agents and not as victims. And we're not void of offense ourselves. This whole idea suggests that our emotions, those related to circumstances, situations, and relationships now, are in any given moment of a certain quality. Think of the parking lot incident with which we began. In one moment, Cheryl was taking offense at an anonymous parking space stealer. In the next, she is embracing her favorite aunt. That her emotions could change so quickly is testimony to being an agent rather than a victim regarding the quality of her feelings. That her feelings did change suggests that in one moment she was taking offense, and the next moment she was void of offense. To those who say, well, yes, Terry, but it's because of her love of her aunt that she changed. Well, precisely. That fact makes our case for agency all the stronger. For if Cheryl were to see the anonymous driver with charity, her response to the parking lot hunt would be of a different quality. She would still, by the way, need to find a parking place. We're not belittling that, right? And there still would be a problem to be solved. But the question is whether the solution will be with or without feelings of offense. My suspicion is many family circumstances that are characterized by the kinds of feelings I've been describing, the problem will be solved if first we get rid of the offended feelings. Then we go work on the solution. Now, the suggestion here is not that we become emotionless zombies droning through a life of unpleasant events that we must put on a happy face about, you know. No. On the contrary, when we are not taking offense, our emotions are deep. We just aren't out of control. Our feelings are real. They just don't reflect our becoming offended. Our emotions, when we are not taking offense, are of a completely different quality than when we are offended. Some emotions, such as sorrow, grief, joy, charity, compassion, love, forgiveness, humility, meekness, are what we experience when we walk by faith. Other emotions, such as resentment, hostility, revenge, rage, bitterness, are expressions of our faithless moments. The quality of our emotions turns on whether we as agents take offense or are void of offense, whether we as agents walk by faith, acknowledging our weakness, or abandon our faith and our humility in order to find fault with others. It is popular to see the situation or the circumstance as the causes of our feelings. But it is who we are in those circumstances which tells the truth about our feelings. When we take offense, our feelings themselves become offensive, perhaps even to ourselves. When we are void of offense, our feelings become invitations to others to give up their offensiveness. Of course, we have no guarantee others will change. Whatever Joseph and Hiram learned about being void of offense and being personally faithful, they learned that the world can be oblivious to, if not actively against, such gospel truths. The question is never, will others respond to my being void of offense? It is always, how can I live so as to not be guilty of offenses? Now, do these ideas apply to everyday life as well as life and death situations? My claim is they just can't help but be relevant. The wife of a long-distance truck driver is worried about dinner being late. She and her husband always celebrate his return from 3 or 4 days on the road with a quiet dinner. But because she's late with dinner this time, she's a little grateful that she hasn't heard his air brakes yet. Because she's afraid that when he does come home, and if the dinner's not ready, that he will be offended, or in the way we're talking, he will take offense. Alas, she does hear the air brakes. He comes all too soon. The table's not set, the dinner's not ready. She holds her breath, bites her lip, comes in the back door. He looks around the corner. He looks at the yet unset table. She's expecting that he's going to take offense, that his face will be troubled, that he'll mumble something to himself about, been gone 4 days and you can't even have the dinner ready. But you know what? It was all something she imagined. He took one look at the unset table, looked into her eyes and said, "Looks like I got home, honey, just in time to help." That's what it means to live void of offense in a simple situation like that. A boy attends Rick's college. He joins the LDS church. A year passes. He accepts a mission call. He hasn't even seen his parents since they became offended at his joining the church, and now he's got a mission call. They agree to drive to an airport, which is on the way to his mission, where he has a layover on his way to the mission field. His mother is softening already. His father seems to be distant. But he lives void of offense toward them. He never mutters in his mind against them. He writes them from the mission field with a soft heart. He writes them faithfully. His mother is baptized before he finishes his mission. After his mission, he returns to baptize his father. Now, neither he nor you and I ever had any guarantee of consequences of our righteous living. He had no guarantee that his parents' hearts would soften. In this case, they did. He always, as an agent, had the power to live void of offense toward them. And I believe it was one of the reasons he was not only such a good missionary, but that his parents were invited to do right. A demanding father who's reared his children by violating every feature of D&C 121. He's without meekness, he's without patience, he's without long-suffering, he's without love unfeigned. He finds himself resenting the rudeness of his children and accuses them of ingratitude. They retreat from him ever further. He at first sees their alienation as proof they are unworthy of being in his household. Then one night, after prayer, he's consumed with a love for them and goes to each one individually. He asks forgiveness for the way he has treated them. It comes from a heart void of offense. With one child, he begins anew. His apology is accepted, so to speak. The other child rejects the plea and is hard-hearted against the father. So here you've got a situation, the father is confronted by one child who responds, one who does not. He resolves to never give up and to live void of offense. And his only way of inviting the hard-hearted child he helped create is by not being hard-hearted with that child again. He has no guarantee of the outcome, and to this day he has no guarantee of the outcome. But he faces the joy and sorrow of that by giving his best, by being void of offense, rather than by being offended. And he moves from bitterness to sorrow regarding the children who continue to reject him. Now, I've drawn a contrast between an idea in the world regarding being victims of our emotions and the restoration, which says it's possible to put a certain quality of emotion into our souls. There are glimpses from the world regarding what I'm talking about. They don't have the whole truth, but they have some. Here's one from Anne Morrow Lindbergh, who had plenty of reason to be offended, so to speak. She says, I do not believe that sheer suffering teaches. If suffering alone taught, all the world would be wise, since everyone suffers. To suffering must be added mourning, understanding, patience, love, openness, and the willingness to remain vulnerable. Eleanor Roosevelt said, nobody can offend me without my permission. Okay? I've got a final observation. I've told a few of you about the death of one of my best friends. He died while jogging just days before his 37th birthday. We had served in the bishopric together. I flew back to the city where his funeral was to be held. In visiting the house of the widow, I found mourners in every room. A woman went from room to room, comforting the visitors. It was the widow herself. No, she was not in denial. She was in faith. She was in compassion. She was in love. She was in mourning. She was mourning with those that had come to mourn with her. She was void of offense. She was not naive about the future, for her own mother had been left a widow when she, the daughter, was the same age as her oldest child was now. She was facing, a generation later, the same circumstance her mother had faced. The same. She did not shake her fist at the heavens. From the beginning of her widowhood, she sought the Lord's help along a road that would prove not to be easy. Her only choice, brothers and sisters, was, do I live my life on the earth with the Lord's help, or do I reject the Lord's help? Do I live void of offense, or do I become offended? The quality of my life will change according to the quality of heart with which I live my life. So how are we to take the gospel seriously? How are we to take the gospel view of life into our families? Well, the starting point we've talked about today requires us to take our agency seriously, and therefore to live so that the quality of our emotions is worthy of our faith. In fact, there is, to me, no other escape from this whole idea of being void of offense. I believe it's crucial to understanding anything we do that is right, and it's the simple starting point, even though it's not easy. The simplicity of it is what causes some people to resist doing the right thing, to always feel justified given what other people have done. When the Savior testified that some of even the disciples would be offended in him, he meant you will not be void of offense. You and I can live, I believe, in a manner that's void of offense. And when we do, the world we've been living in when we are offended is abandoned in favor of a world where we really do shout for joy for being on the earth. We really do seek the Lord's help to make a difference, to love our children, to sacrifice in their behalf, to be meek and lowly in heart regarding them. My prayer is whatever we've talked about today is more meaningful to you a week from Wednesday or Thursday night when the children are fighting at dinner than it is right now. If what we say today, in fact, doesn't infect our real world, then we have squandered the time we've spent today. But if we use the principles of today, if we turn our hearts to God and ask Him to be with us in the very moments when we have the greatest need, I'm convinced our world will change. I'm convinced that the gospel in everyday life is a vision of a different world. And I pray for that and testify to that in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.